Our mission, and we choose to accept it, is zero injuries and zero environmental impact. A healthy workforce and environment is key to our nation's continued success. The Mission Zero podcast is a deep dive with the industry's top experts into the health, safety, and environmental aspects of today's workplace. Our mission is to be a platform for new ideas and strategies that, when implemented, will improve our safety, our environment, and how we govern out business. We are making the world safer, and we're going to have fun doing it.
I'm at the NOV Tower in Houston, Texas, talking with the Vice President of Renewable Energy, Ed Whitnell. Welcome, Ed. How are you?
I'm doing well, Jeff. How are you?
Wonderful, sir. Thank you very much. My third conversation on this podcast was with David Reed, and he had mentioned some of the renewable things that were going on at NOV, and I was like, well, sooner or later we need to take a little bit deeper dive into that. And my podcast is an HSC podcast, and that last one is environmental, and that absolutely applies to renewables. So before we dive in, I just wanted you to maybe give us a little bit about your history. What brought you to being in the position you're in today?
Well, it's been a long journey. So I am third generation oil field. And when I graduated from school, I said that I would move anywhere in the world except Houston, Texas. And I promptly took a job with Transocean in Houston. Stayed with them about 5 years. That was a great experience, taught me a lot. During one of the downturns, was laid off, but came to work for, at the time, Varco. Spent the next couple of years doing QHSE, believe it or not.
Okay, great.
Mostly because I had been such a pain in the neck for them that they wanted to put me in a role where people couldn't be as much of a pain in the neck as I had been. But moved from there into our aftermarket business, doing field service and repair. Eventually kind of looked after that business for us for the Western Hemisphere. And then moved over into what we call operations, which is really sort of sales and manufacturing. Did that for the last 10 years. Worked here in the U.S., worked in Brazil, worked in the Middle East most recently. We spent 4 years in Dubai. And then got the opportunity to come over here and lead the nascent renewables part of our business. And that was about 10 months ago.
Okay. And how long have you been in this position currently, did you say?
About 10 months.
10 months. Okay, that's what you meant by that. Okay. And where did you grow up? Did you grow up in Midland or where?
No, Beaumont boy.
Okay.
Beaumont boy. So
fourth generation, that leads it back to the beginning, right? I mean, that's got to be.
Well, third generation.
Okay.
Third generation. My grandfather worked for United Gas.
Okay.
So all up and down the Gulf Coast. My mother worked for Mobil Chemical. My uncle worked for Aramco. And they both counseled me against getting into the industry, so I promptly took that counsel into.
Why did they do that? What was it? Because the up and downs?
Mostly because of the up and downs. I mean, They had grown up with it. They had lived through it. My uncle did not start as an oil man. He actually started out as a rocket scientist, working on the Apollo stuff, and just could not avoid the siren song. And I ran into the same problem.
My first coming out of college, it was a while before I started touching the oil field. And I tell people when I come to talk to them, you got to be specific about what you're doing, because I've never worked in the oil field. I tell them that up front. I'm not connected. All I'm doing is trying to create products for workers. So I had to learn a lot about them. But I traveled mostly internationally. And when the first downturn I experienced was, I'd come back to the U.S. and I'd hear my counterparts here talking about the terrible downturn. And I'm sitting here going, well, I'm not seeing that, and I realized, you dig deeper and you realize the U.S.'s downturns were significantly worse than other countries and globally. Like it is a severe feast and famine of an industry here. And it is tough because you guys are losing really quality people probably on each downturn, right?
We do. I mean, it's one of the Achilles heels of our industry is because we ultimately provide a commodity. As that commodity goes up and goes down, we either have to make more of it or we're making too much of it.
Yeah.
And therefore people get impacted by that.
That's the free market, though.
It is.
It's the risk of the free market. You can go through the roof, but you can also go through the floor, I guess, as well.
When I got laid off, I spent a long time, and bear in mind, I was 28 years old, right? I was still young. I was engaged, but effectively, no, I wasn't engaged. I was married at that point. Mm. But I spent several weeks thinking about, do I want to stay in this industry or do I want to go do something else? Because I was thinking about starting my own business. And at the end of the day, because of where I was in my life with a new bride, she was pregnant, new house, I was buying my wife a new car.
Which downturn was this?
This was 2001.
Okay.
2002.
Okay.
Between the just sort of the risk profile that I was tolerating then and just the experience that 5 years in the industry had afforded me. I'd already spent 2 years of those 5 years living overseas as a young engineer.
Okay.
Very few industries afford that type of opportunity, afford those types of chances to go out and learn. I mean, I remember my first project. I had been on the project for 3 days when the project manager brought me into his office and said he had to leave and I needed to finish doing what he had been doing. I was so green. I was wet behind the ears. Yeah. Didn't know up from down, man. But that was just that was the industry at the time. There weren't enough people, and the ones they hired, they got opportunities thrown at them.
So you had your degree in petroleum engineering or
mechanical engineering?
Mechanical engineering. Yeah. Where'd you go to school?
A&M.
Okay, you're an Aggie. I'm a Red Raider. Please don't throw me out of this building.
The guy 3 offices down, Red Raider.
Oh yeah.
There are a lot of Red Raiders and a lot of Aggies and a few Longhorns.
The Aggie, obviously, and I'm sure it's the whole engineering department, but the petroleum engineering department is something else in Texas A&M. I mean, I love the back and forth between Texas Tech or any of the colleges, really. I'll always love that, but I have a healthy respect for Texas A&M, a very healthy respect, but it's always fun to take jabs, and which is a reason I despised it when the Football Alliance realignment took place. Mm-hmm. I despise that. I get it. I know why A&M did it. It makes sense for them. But man, I missed that inter-office friendship poking when the game week came about. Mm-hmm. That was always fun. And
it was.
What I liked as a Red Raider about Texas Tech is 8 times out of 10, A&M was the better team, but somehow we'd find a way to beat you guys. And I'm sure it was infuriating, but the A&M would always be the better team, and we'd still find a way to win, and it was just ridiculous.
The one time I drove all the way up to Lubbock, some friends of mine were Raiders, mm-hmm. and they were on the hospitality team for the football team.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
And so they got us some tickets. So me and a buddy drove up there, and that long drive. And I remember we lost that game on a field goal with about a 90-mile-an-hour wind blowing at the kicker's back. And I swear he must have kicked a 174-yard field goal. And it even hit the crossbar. Like it was.
I think I remember this game. I think I remember this game.
It was heartbreaking, man.
Yeah, I think I remember that game. Well, I hope they were good to you. I hate
they were.
Some people take it a little too far. They become terrible to treat other people. But my time in College Station has always been well treated, and people were really good to me. But I won't spend too much time on football. But boy, you guys are looking good for a title run this year. Are you?
Man, I would like to think we are. I thought we were last year.
It's kind of that time. It's time. Like I think
Jimbo's doing a great job with recruiting.
Yeah,
we certainly seem to have the pieces mm-hmm. to at least be able to challenge. Beating Alabama one time every 10 years is not really satisfying enough.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, to be fair though, nobody beats Alabama more than that. I mean, that's just I grew up in Georgia. Okay. And so, all this time around, obviously everybody back home was just giddy about the Bulldogs, but I kind of left that behind me, so I'm not really into the Bulldogs anymore. The only time I pulled for them really was when Miko Hardman played. If you mm-hmm. remember him, he plays for the Chiefs.
Yeah.
I grew up with his father, and I played with his father and uncle, so it felt like family was out there playing at that point. So, but let me get back to the subjects at hand. Instead of we could talk about football all day, I'm sure. But so mechanical engineering, you're out there in the field. So you said you started out doing typical engineering work in the oil field, and then you moved to safety.
I did. I started out doing at the time Transocean had an engineering training program, and there were a bunch of us that were in the program, and then we were kind of the first. There's about a 2 or 3 year period where Transocean started hiring, and all but probably 2 of the guys that were in that EIT program got kicked out, and we got converted into project engineers, and we went out and built the original Enterprise class rigs.
Okay.
So it was sort of a baptism by fire, but in all the best ways. I mean, there were lots of senior guys around to answer our questions and help us along. But it was a good way to get into the industry. In fact, I was telling somebody last week that there really is no better way to learn about a drilling rig than to go build a few.
Yeah.
It's a great way to really understand kind of system by system how they come together.
Yeah. I begged my way onto a couple of them because I want to see this, right? I'm making gloves for these people. I'd like to see it. But yeah, what I tell people back home, the complexity of the oil and gas industry is staggering. I mean, you think it's just put a drill down into the world and the oil comes popping up, and I think that's how it is. And I'm like, no, it is an incredibly engineering intensive project. And I interviewed one of the people going for the Railroad Commission, and so, like, I had to tell her at one, I had to stop and say, look, you're talking way over most people's heads here, because you're talking, most people listening are not doing this side of the work. They don't understand all this, but it is incredibly complicated. So these people in the oil field, these engineers, these people out there working are brilliant. There's some brilliant people out there, man.
There really are. And thankfully we have quite a few of them here, and I've got a bunch of them on my team, which makes it so much better.
Where did you work? You said you the Middle East, and was this when you were doing projects, or was this later on?
No, the project work that I did with Transocean was down in Brazil.
Okay.
So I did 2 different sort of trips down there over the span of 2 years, living there with a 1 month break between them.
Is it Macaé?
Not much. Maybe 1 month out of the 2 years.
Oh, okay.
About a year of it was in Rio de Janeiro, and then about a month in Macaé, and the rest of the time I was in a place called Angra dos Reis.
Oh, that's a new one for me.
There was an old shipyard there, and we were the second project when they reopened. It became a Keppel Fells yard. So we went down there and did an amazing project, converting a drilling rig. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like they're making a little bit of a comeback as well. Seems like the future, the offshore looks like they're expecting some growth here. Some of the companies.
Yeah, I mean, the commodity price staying where it is for as long as it is, with geopolitical instability where it is, sort of the chaos meter rising.
Yeah.
That really supports a lot of what ends up being a higher cost commodity, but often long paybacks because you hit such large fields.
How did you end up in QHSE?
I was realizing I didn't originally answer your question. So when I came out of the field, I was working in corporate maintenance. And in the corporate maintenance group, we were really just trying to reduce downtime on tools. So we took and this is sort of data readily available for everything in the world everywhere. Yeah. So we had to do a lot of manual data gathering and try to reduce downtime. And in doing that, the top drive tended to be one of the leading causes of downtime. So I spent a lot of time looking at what caused that downtime and what could we do differently to reduce it. And since most of our top drives came from, at the time, Varco, now NOV, I spent a lot of time with those guys on how they could make their product better for us, both in original manufacture and in overhaul. And I was enough of a pain in the rear that when I left Transocean, they actually called and said, "Hey, do you want a job?" And I was like, "Well, gosh, I'm available."
Turns out maybe.
Yeah. So it was a great opportunity to kind of carry on some of that work, and it set me up to help them do some early things with QHSE, just on even then back then on how we were measuring ourselves, right? Because we didn't really consistently measure ourselves back then.
Yeah, I don't think they understand the cost of things too. They didn't associate safety problems, environmental problems with cost of business at that point.
Yeah,
I still, it's funny. I still have a rough time getting senior management for companies to associate that cost. And I was like, you're putting everything together? Because, I've told us in the past, the people that care about the medical bill are over here. The people that care about the insurance are over here. The people that care about downtime are over here. They're not getting together and saying, let's put all this together and see what our total cost is. Right. One company did, and it was awful. And I said, it was more than I thought it would be, but it was a private one. I can't mention who it was, but it was a company here in town, and it is a substantial cost. But moving past the safety, where did you go from there?
So from there, I went into, or that was actually a part of aftermarket, but then I kind of moved into aftermarket operations.
And that was with NOV, or
with Varco for a short period, and then when National Oil Well bought Varco, we became NOV. Mm-hmm. That was within a year or two of doing that. So I looked after remote support, and then field service and repair, and then did sort of that scope for all of the Western Hemisphere.
Okay. And now you're the vice president of renewable energy for an oil company, an oil field service company. So most people would think that's a little bit of an irony, but it's not really, is it?
It really isn't, man. When we think about energy, oil and gas make up a significant portion of our energy mix, but by no means is it the only. Mm-hmm. We started looking at renewables actually way back many years ago, but before it was sort of mandated, before there was really a push to it. Mm. Just because we saw so many of the synergies with our offshore work, particularly with sort of offshore wind, whether it was, this is before floating, but fixed offshore wind. So much of what we already did kind of fed into that. And
you're saying it was an easy transition?
For that part, it was. We made an acquisition of Gusto MSC, which was an amazing company, really, really great people, great engineers, great products. And that's a part of our marine and construction group. And so that group looks after offshore wind just as a business. That's already an ongoing enterprise for us.
Well, you and I were talking offline about the idea that there's really no sensible opinions. There's always the far reaches to both sides, and everything reaches to the end of the political spectrum, no matter what it was. But on the answer of what is the answer to climate change, what is the answer to dealing with the energy future, and again, same thing. People jump on, well, it's got to be only oil. Oil's got to be the only thing, or we have to rid ourselves of fossil fuels immediately. Neither is anywhere near possible, right? In any world where there's any critical thinking going into this, there's no world where it says that any of those could take place. So the answer is both. We need both. We need to rely and then continue to improve our technology and efficiencies with fossil fuel extraction, but we also need to start developing other of the renewable energies that you were particularly working on, to make them more efficient and to make them more of a contributing factor, right? And so, to me, what I've seen about it, I wrote a paper. I spoke with Chris Wright at Liberty in depth and talked to some people, and I wrote a 2-page article on the case for fossil fuels, and that is got to be the way to go about it. So it's impressive that NOV has already been 20 years in, 15 years in, maybe more than that, diving in.
Well, it was probably 7 or 8 years ago that we originally looked at it.
I thought you were saying it was longer than that.
No, it was really. This was
early on for an oil company.
We were early on for that particular piece of it, just because again it made such obvious sense.
Yeah.
But since then, a lot of our sort of drive to innovate has been brought to bear in places that we don't normally play. Like just personally for my group, we're focused on solar, on onshore wind, and sort of non-conventional geothermal right now. Mm-hmm. And
those are the three priorities for NOV?
They are for us right now.
Okay.
We're also looking at CCUS. That's a big thing for us. We're looking at hydrogen.
What is CCUS?
Carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration.
Okay.
But those in particular, hydrogen, my group does a little bit of work with, but a lot of what hydrogen centers on, the strengths that you need, really fit with within some other parts of our group. Okay. So we have a different group that generally is looking into hydrogen, and similarly with CCUS, because really CCUS is, at least the capture piece is a lot of chemistry focus, whereas the sequestration is a mix of newer technologies and then more traditional, pump it into the ground and monitor it.
Gotcha. Two things I want you to expand upon. And for the audience, this is, like I said, this isn't an oil field podcast, so there's a lot of people that aren't necessarily directly in this field. Can you explain what NOV is and what type of company NOV is? Because people listening may think they're all the same, like Shell, but NOV is not a driller. NOV is not an operator. It's an oil field service company. And can you just kind of give a general definition of what that is?
Of course. So I'm speaking about we call it upstream, operators would call it E&P, but the drilling side of the business, what has to happen to find the oil, that's the part that I have historically touched. Now NOV touches sort of that piece as well as all the way down to production through our CAPS group. But if you think of oil companies as sort of the operators, kind of tier one within our industry, they're the ones that actually go out and look to produce oil and sell oil. Then they're supported by all kinds of service companies. I'm just going to start with a group and call them the drillers. So an operator, an oil company would go and contract a driller. They may contract some outside services like directional drilling, cementing, that sort of thing. And that would come from companies like Schlumberger, Halliburton, Baker, NOV. NOV also supplies a lot of the drilling equipment that's used on those rigs to actually go out and find the oil. And then there's a whole host of companies that then support either those drilling operations directly, providing logistics for them, providing even up to and including, say, food to the rigs, right?
Oh, wow.
And then for us, obviously, as an equipment supplier, as a service supplier, then there's a group of companies that support us within our supply chain for us to be able to produce drilling equipment or produce drill pipe, to produce frac spreads, that sort of thing.
Okay, so there's a lot of tentacles, but in all, it's an oil field service company and one of the largest in the world.
Yeah.
I would imagine in 50, 60 countries, something like that.
I don't actually know what our country count is, but it's large.
I have been on an NOV location in, I think, probably about 12 or 13 different countries. I tell them, I said, the farthest reaching being Tierra del Fuego. I was at your site down there one time years ago. So I was the tip of the world, like the end of Chile and Argentina. But now back to the renewables. So you named all 5 things. I'd kind of like to expand a little bit on each one of them. The first one was wind. Where is NOV in the process of that? Are y'all manufacturing the windmills? Are you operating them?
No. So not really our sweet spot there. We're doing a number of things, right? When we think about offshore wind, the Marine Construction Group, the Gusto MSC Group, they were naval architects and equipment designers. So them, along with other parts of that group, that's why it made such a good synergy, have a long history of things like heavy lift cranes, jacking systems. Gusto MSC, as a naval architect, has hull designs. So things like lift vessels for installing offshore wind turbines, whether fixed or floating. That's a part of the market that we participate in well.
Okay, so you're on the design and engineering side.
Absolutely.
Okay, gotcha.
We also can turn around and help manufacture those. We've had some press releases recently about some of our floating offshore wind supports, which again, unsurprisingly, look a lot like an offshore vessel.
I think most people wouldn't
make.
know that they were floating. I think most people know that exist.
It's the floating is really interesting because if you get a foundation that's large enough, you can make your turbine that much higher. And generally speaking, the higher you are, the more capacity factor you get, which just means the more energy you can produce.
And the problem, I guess the unsolved problem of wind is, and you please correct me because this is the public information that you hear. Wind is that you can't store the energy; it has to be used immediately. Is that correct and the correct thinking there?
Yeah, I mean with really any energy source, right? You have to use it when it's there, unless you have a storage system, and that can be it can be a battery. There are lots of people that are looking at clever ideas on how you can store energy over a longer duration than a battery, because batteries aren't, at least from a say utility scale standpoint, right? Batteries aren't great for really providing energy over a long duration. Batteries are good at dumping energy over a short duration.
They're also not good environmentally long term, right?
Well, I think it depends on the battery. I mean, there are lots of different battery chemistries. Again, there are some batteries that aren't the batteries that you and I are thinking of, like a lithium ion battery, but you can look at things like a pumped hydro, which is a fancy way of saying a water wheel.
Okay.
As a species, the human race has been using pumped hydro for thousands of years. Yeah. And there are some really clever pumped hydro ideas. Now, traditionally, pumped hydro requires a certain geography. You've got to have a body of water up here, something where you can take that water and get it down, somehow get it back up. But there's some really clever things being done in that space that actually would act as long duration batteries. Okay. So not traditional batteries thinking about lithium ion, rare earth metals, and all the questions that go around that.
Well, one interesting one I really want to hear about it are the ones that are probably more in the news. The ones aren't as out there in front of our faces, like wind energy and solar energy, geothermal. Could you give the audience a little bit of an overview of, I think maybe Canada, is that where y'all doing some of that or somewhere?
We actually do it all over the world.
Okay.
If you think about geothermal drilling, it's very, very similar to oil drilling, right? The difference tends to be geography. So traditionally you would be around a fault line, you would be around a place with geysers, because really what you're doing is you're looking for heat. You're looking for heat and pressure, right? So it's always been geography limited. Now, again, people are working on how to make that not so geography limited. We fall into that camp. But just serving the traditional geothermal market, NOV makes the rigs that are used for that. We make the bits that are used for that. We make the drill pipe that's used for that. We make completion tools that are used for that. We've served the geothermal industry for 50 years.
Is it promising to grow as an energy source?
Geothermal is really interesting because it tends to be less intermittent than, say, solar and wind. When we look at it from a cost basis, we have a way of levelizing that. But at the end of the day, people want energy effectively 24/7 today, right? Yeah. So having it only available intermittently is a challenge. And so we look at how do we get around that. Geothermal tends to not have that same challenge because you can have a closed loop system or even an open loop system where you're taking hot water, hot steam, running it through a couple of turbines and producing electricity effectively 24/7.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so y'all are doing that all over the world. I thought Canada is Canada not an important one there, or is it?
It is. Okay. We're doing, just as a company, we support geothermal everywhere it is.
How does that stack up on how environmentally friendly? Is it considered cleaner? Is it considered intensive?
Once it's producing, it's effectively carbon free, I mean, obviously, we get into the question of what do we consider in tier 3 emissions, which is very gray, and that's a problem, right? But once it is up and running, the plant really doesn't have a significant carbon footprint.
Nice. And other one you mentioned, hydrogen. How are you guys? What are you doing with that? How is hydrogen captured? How is it used? And what is the potential for hydrogen in the future?
Oh, that is the $10 billion question. And I will preface this for your comment section by saying I am not a hydrogen expert.
That's all right.
But there are the color hydrogens. Gray hydrogen is made from natural gas, and blue hydrogen is also made from natural gas, but it's done differently. Green hydrogen, the energy to catalyze the hydrogen comes from a renewable source. And I heard recently, I haven't checked it, but I've heard that pink hydrogen is actually hydrogen that's made with nuclear power. I've heard purple hydrogen and gold hydrogen. All these different hydrogens, and hydrogen certainly is an interesting energy source. I think there is lots of potential, but it is not the answer today.
Yeah,
I'm not going to call it fusion.
So we're in infancy on this one.
We really are. I mean, they're in addition to the fact that right now it takes a lot of energy to make hydrogen. Mm-hmm. Transporting hydrogen, moving hydrogen around is problematic. There are lots of people that think we can reuse existing infrastructure, and we can to an extent. The problem is we can only use it if we dilute it in natural gas. Mm-hmm. So we have to move it in natural gas if we want to use the existing pipelines, but you can only use it up to ballpark kind of 18 to 20% dilution in natural gas. But then you still have to separate it from natural gas at the other end, which takes energy. Yeah. And so you're effectively reducing the net energy value in the hydrogen when you have to do that.
Yeah, I interviewed, he's one of my good friends, Tim Lowry from ACT, Applied Cryo Technologies. I think I recall him saying that they're making some of those too, or getting requests for some of that stuff. And I had to, now that you said that, I'll have to ask him a little bit about the hydrogen to see if what he's doing, see what the demand is for that, because anything new is interesting. I'm really going to look into the nuclear one though. That is. I got to find out what that even is. I mean, that's pretty different.
Nuclear. I mean, there's obviously a generally accepted view of nuclear, and a lot of that is related to the things that hit the news
30, 40 years ago.
Well, yeah, 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl and Fukushima, which are all terrible tragedies, right? But the technology around those pressure water reactors bears no resemblance to the technology that we're looking at with sort of small modular reactors and the micro modular reactors. Those reactors, because of how they're built, because of the way they're fueled, even in a runaway reaction, no human intervention is needed, and you walk away from it. You come back 2 years later when it cools down.
Yeah.
So it's very, very different from sort of the nuclear promise of the 50s, where every house is going to be powered by a nuclear powered toaster, right?
Yeah. I never understood, obviously that reputation got there, but it takes a pretty significant, natural disaster to overcome a nuclear power plant. And that's what you had in Japan, right? We have the Southwest United States, and there's no significant threat of anything there. They have floods, but they're small. They don't have tornadoes. They don't have hurricanes, and they don't have earthquakes. So I don't understand why we couldn't find a way to build proper nuclear plants there. And, because it's environmentally friendly for the most part, right? People don't realize that. I mean, it's a pretty clean energy, and it's very safe energy.
It is again, once the plant is built, right, the carbon footprint of that facility is almost zero.
Yeah.
It's, when you think about non-intermittent sources, nuclear is the answer in terms of baseload long term.
Yeah.
For sure.
You think we'll ever get there?
I do.
Okay.
I'm definitely bullish on nuclear, but it kind of gets to, and I wanted to say thank you for not using energy transition when we were starting because words matter. And even though today there is a sort of a generally accepted definition around energy transition, and what it really means is not energy transition, but it means energy sources that aren't
kill oil. That's what it means.
You can go there.
Yeah,
but it's really an energy expansion, and I shamelessly steal that from a gentleman at EWTC's annual meeting where he threw that out there, and unfortunately I think that, just practically speaking, the ship has sailed and energy transition is what we're stuck with. But it's not really a transition. It's an expansion. And whether or not you agree with the climate science, there is a belief that lowering carbon emissions is ultimately going to be good for the planet. And people are making investing decisions that way. So as we look at these other energy sources, it really comes down to what are we willing to pay for the energy that we want.
A couple of things you hit on there. This are things I wrote about, and one in particular. It's not all technical to me. It's a little bit more than that in some cases. And one thing that I spoke about that hit home with me was energy poverty. And who are we to say that these countries, that can't go out there and provide themselves cheap energy as well? We built our world on cheap energy. We built this like all the Western world built this world on cheap energy. China built their world on cheap energy, and every single aspect of humanity that gets better in congruence with the availability of cheap energy. And they are preventing some of these countries, and my main focus is on Africa, because it's such a big place with so many people. And, one thing I wrote about, women there spend an average of 2 to 3 hours a day just trying to find clean water. Imagine if they could, those same women were participating in the Spree of Ideas. If they were being educated and all these ideas would come from them, from new different people, and we could solve problems much easier. And, the energy transition, it sounded like you were saying that oil really won't go away. It's just the increased use of energy will come from different sources. Is that what you were saying, or did I mishear you there?
Well, I honestly didn't mean to imply a position about it. I'll give you my position.
Please.
Petroleum is not going anywhere. Mm-hmm. Petroleum is not going anywhere in the energy mix for a long while. In fact, again, you and I had this discussion before we started, but if we really believe that the environment is what's driving, or the environment should be informing our investment decisions in energy, then we should be replacing, right now, we should be replacing coal-fired power plants with gas-fired generators in the same locations. And you'll have a significant 40 to 60% reduction in CO2 emissions just from doing that. Even though I believe nuclear is a long-term solution, that right there has a significant impact on the environment. Reduces carbon emissions. But that means we need more gas. Thankfully, we're in a place where our industry can provide that gas. Yeah. And when we think about today and the measure of chaos and what's going on with Russia being aggressive against the Ukraine, we can not only provide that gas, we can provide that gas here on our own soil.
And ship it over.
Ship it to them, ship it to our own power plants. But then as we talk about that as the energy mix, petroleum's still not going anywhere, because your laptop and half of our clothing, the paint, the carpet in this room.
It's much harder to find something that wasn't produced by petroleum at some point than it is to find something that is. I mean, you can't find anything that petroleum didn't touch. It touched everything just about. And, I know I'm interviewing you in this podcast, but I have a pretty strong opinion on that too about, where we're going as far as the climate change. I do happen to believe that carbon dioxide emissions do affect the climate and the temperature. However, my opinion on, and I did, for my, essay I wrote on it, I did an enormous amount of research, and the conclusion I came to was really, we don't know how much, right? There's no measure of how much. And to hell with worrying about what happened in the past. How are we preparing for the future? And to me, all the scenarios do not factor in mitigation whatsoever. I guess they just think people are going to sit on Miami and just the water's just going to surge in a few seconds and they can't survive. It's like, people have been doing this for all of humanity. If you go to Egypt, half of Alexandria is underwater from the days of Alexander. And things change on its own without any sort of climate. But the climate was increasing before. We were seeing, a warming that was happening pre-industrial age at a certain rate. And what we really need to do, instead of whining about what happened in the past or any of that, we need to focus on the future. The future says, okay, we might as well get used to the fact that we're going to see a temperature rise. Who cares what the blame of it is? Instead of trying to fight it or taking some drastic measures that destroys our economy, because if the United States were to quit oil and gas right now, in 13 years, the world would have completely soaked up all that that were missed out, and it would be at the same level again. Plus, we would have poverty all over this country, right? And so the idea is to pump money, in my opinion, is to pump as much money into technology. Just pump it into technology and mitigation, because these countries that still suffer losses from natural disasters do so because they haven't had the benefit of infrastructure powered by cheap energy, right? So they can protect themselves. Natural disasters don't, we measure natural disasters in dollars now, not people, because there's so few people that die in natural disasters compared to what it used to. I mean, we in oil and gas did that. Cheap energy did that. But my thing is that we've got to figure out how to remove carbon dioxide from the air. Now, there's a guy, I can't remember his name. He was on Joe Rogan recently, and he is a brilliant scientist. This technology already exists. It just isn't big enough and it isn't cheap enough to be used. But in 20 years, it might be. And so I wanted to lead that conversation into the last thing you talked about was carbon capture. I do want you to talk about that because I don't understand that. So I'd like to, can you explain what you're doing there, if you don't mind?
Unfortunately, like hydrogen, this really is sort of outside of my bailiwick. Mm-hmm. I could go next door and grab a gentleman who lives in that world.
Oh yeah,
but I can give you high level, and again, I preface it with protecting your comments. When people tell me I'm wrong, I probably am.
They do the same to me.
Okay.
I do a history podcast too. It's like a little thing of my own, and I had some couple people write to me. No, that didn't happen that way. I went, thanks, appreciate you.
So, carbon capture, use, and sequestration is just what it says, right? It's take carbon capture, right? So we're going to go to a place where we are emitting it, mm-hmm. and that can be, that can be the tailpipe of your car, that can be a stack at a refinery, it could be the exhaust on a ship, anything that does that, that carbon can, more than theoretically, it can be captured, but it comes down to the process that you use. It's a chemical process on how you're going to effectively isolate the carbon and then put it into something where you can hold on to it. So that's the capture piece. The sequestration piece is where traditionally you're going to go and again use a lot of the technology that the oil and gas industry has from drilling. You're going to find the right geology, and then you're effectively going to pump that carbon into the earth, and you're going to sit on it.
So this effectively makes you more efficient. It keeps you from losing the carbon that you're losing because I mean, obviously, when I talked to David about the e-frac, I mean, instead of blowing off the flares, you're no longer doing that. So you're becoming more effective. You're becoming more environmentally friendly. And it sounds like this would be, if it turns out to be, a project that grows, this would be a really great thing for the feather in the cap of the oil and gas industry.
Well, we already do it at some level, right? I mean, Exxon announced, and I'm terrible about dates in the past, but I'm going to throw out there 4 to 6 months ago, they announced, I believe it was a $10 billion investment in a direct air capture, carbon capture program. And I think the idea was to generate support for it, bring along partners, and then work on how to deploy it, right? So there's certainly an appetite for it. Right now, it comes down to economy. I mean, it's very expensive to do that.
Yeah, there's some fun money in this, isn't it? I've seen some.
There's a lot of
information
money
on
in
that.
It.
Yeah.
But again, you've mentioned technology several times, right? And the truth of the matter is carbon capture the right thing? It's one of the things.
Yeah.
But being more efficient. If you think about carbon dioxide is released because we have incomplete burning or only partial burning. Working on how we burn most effectively, most efficiently, that reduces carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
We actually offer a technology that, again, small stuff, right? But we offer a technology that helps reduce the emissions associated with all of the hydraulic power unit operations on a rig. And we offer that today, right?
Yeah.
And it's quantifiable, it's measurable, but it's small. But those small steps, particularly gains in efficiency. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've seen estimates, and these are the ones that I tend to think are accurate, right? But when we think about how do we do this, how do we reduce carbon emissions as a whole, efficiency gains has got to be a third of it.
Yeah.
If it's not, we're missing an opportunity.
Yeah, I think where people sit on that is whether or not. There's usually two different types of people. There's people who believe in humanity and people that don't. I'm one of those ones that thinks, yeah, we'll figure this out, because the more it becomes necessary, the money's there. When things are necessary, there's going to be money behind it, and that's what's going to drive it. And that's what capitalism is, right? It's supposed to be, you get a demand for something, somebody's going to find a way. And the more people in the world that have benefited from cheap energy and have more people that have, instead of working all day and in the fields, and they're able to go to school and learn, the more brains we have working on these problems. So oil and gas kind of fixes itself. Because, I mean, I know that's pie in the sky thinking, but that's really how I think. I think,
it's not pie in the sky.
There's a lot of people out there that weren't contributing, because they didn't have the time in the day. And, if you go back and look at all of our thinkers in our early times of our country, they were all rich because only rich people had the time to study. And that's the same thing now. We're rich. Everybody here in the United States is rich compared to these people. So you're rich. You have the time. So, I think, like you said, to wrap it up a little bit, renewables, I guess the solution to all of our problems is a good mix of everything, right? Would you agree with that?
The solution to our problems is more energy.
Yeah.
And it's about changing the energy mix in a way that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, saying all that, there's another question, which we don't need to go down this rabbit hole, but just something for you and listeners to think about is, the right energy solutions have to be predicated on how the energy will be delivered. Mm-hmm. And so the question to ask ourselves, because we hear all these things about, Build Back Better and the infrastructure bill, and, our infrastructure is falling apart and this sort of thing. Going forward, will our grids be more connected or less connected? Because until you answer that question, you're not going to have the optimal energy mix to provide the energy that's needed when it's needed.
So you're saying that it needs to be more connected to be optimal?
I'm actually not saying that.
Oh, okay.
I'm just saying that until we answer that question, we can't really make the best energy decisions.
But don't we keep the grid disconnected for security reasons? Like, isn't that a national security?
Well, but when I say, when we think about the grid national security, that's a whole different podcast.
Yeah. Well, what I'm saying, is just because they can't shut down the whole country at once, right?
No, they can't. But even then, right? So there are grid operators, right? Think of ERCOT, right? Mm-hmm. ERCOT's its own thing, but then within the sphere of where ERCOT operates, there are also little co-ops that operate, right? And so they are effectively, depending on how much generation capacity they have, they may be self-sustaining. They may not need help unless they need help. And so until we can say, as a nation, our grid is going to be more connected or less connected, we struggle to answer the question of what's the right thing. I'll give you an example, right? When we think about nuclear, if we were to take modern nuclear technology and build 5 of those plants per state. Now that's not going to provide near enough energy for the entire state, depending on the state. But let's just say it's 5 per state for ease of belief, right? Then a statewide grid could probably be pretty easily supported. And if you were, as a state, producing more than you needed, you could export that to another state. But if we're not able to do that on a federal level or on a state level, let's say that a municipality wanted to. So if a municipality said that we're going to provide our own energy, and they have the authority to do that, then they could go and put in whatever their power source was, nuclear or otherwise, right? They could go for a small modular reactor and power their municipality and then export that energy. But until we know, not necessarily know, but until we've decided on, do we think it's going to be more connected or less connected, we may or may not be making the right decisions on what, particularly from a baseload standpoint, what baseload energy we're focused on.
So it's tough to make a real hard-nosed long-term decision or focus in on one of them without the grid knowledge or know where we're going with the grid.
Like I told you, I've only been in this role for 10 months or so. I am still learning every day, as a career oil and gas guy.
I mean, it doesn't matter how smart you are. There's so much to this and there's so much out there, and I think people would be shocked I think a lot of people outside of Texas, a lot of people outside of that aren't connected to this industry, that an oilfield service company is actually out here leading the way in some of these renewable energies. And if you're in the oil and gas industry, it makes perfect sense. Like you said, we're already set up to do some of this stuff. We're already made to do this. So I think it's very interesting, and to learn about what NOV is doing. And I guess some of the ones I didn't even come here prepared to talk about, the hydrogen and the carbon capture. So that's fantastic stuff. But Ed, I really appreciate you. Your thoughts on this, your information about what's going on, and your opinions on things. That's interesting. This is probably the first conversation I've had where we've actually went off of just I guess went into a little bit of theory, right, or a little bit of theory about what the future could hold. But thank you very much for the information on the different renewables that NOV is doing, and some of the things that you believe might happen in the future and might not. But thank you very much for coming on, and I hope our listeners enjoy what you had to say because it was very informative.
Well, Jeff, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be here. And if you ever want to talk in the future, I'd love to, man.
Oh, it'll be offline, but I'll definitely be hitting you up when I come across something. If I read something, it's like I'm going to ask you about that and see where they're at with that. But thank you again, sir, and have a great day.
You too.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show and accept the mission. Please subscribe to the Mission Zero podcast on your preferred streaming service and be sure to give us a 5-star review.